Hello, Wouter. Hello, Kristiaan. Welcome to the show. Welcome back, Wouter.
Good to be here. Good to be back again.
Yes.
It has been a while.
Yes, I think you were on episode 15.
15. So at least 100 episodes ago.
Yes, 150 maybe.
Wow.
Wonderful.
Wow. Good to be back.
And in the meantime, so many things have happened. You have grown your business that I think back then you just founded together with Kristiaan, Prototype U. And I want to hear everything about it. And before we're getting there, I always start with a little kind of warm-up question and would like to hear both of your answers. But maybe we can start with Kristiaan. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I don't recall when, and I barely do actually. I think I only mentioned being a facilitator when talking about our programs and that we have facilitators and that I am one of the facilitators. But I wouldn't introduce me somewhere as, hello, I'm Kristiaan, I'm a facilitator in da-da-da-da. So it's part of the job. When that was probably somewhere in the last 4 years, but I don't recall exactly what.
Probably during the first session, Kristiaan.
I don't know if we were speaking of being a facilitator. I think so, because we didn't want to call ourselves coaches, so we must have used facilitator. So that's, when was this? January 2018.
And I would be curious, Kristiaan, since you just said you didn't want to call yourself coaches. So what for you is the difference between a coach and a facilitator, and why didn't you want to call yourself a coach?
Because I think coaching is a job where you need to get trained in very well. There are a lot of coaches, and I think a lot of good coaches, but also maybe an equal amount or even more coaches that had a 3-day training in being a coach. I think I can coach people. I mean, I've been a lecturer in University of Applied Science for 9 years. There you coach as well. But with Prototype U, we facilitate a certain process that people do themselves. So actually we help them to coach themselves and do some kind of peer coaching. I'm not skilled and trained in being a coach, so I should not call myself a coach.
Thank you for making the distinction. It's very interesting. How about you, Wouter?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it, and I think I've called myself a facilitator for a very long time, but in a different context. And it was the context of where we met in the first podcast, facilitating innovation processes and making better products faster and bringing a team together to do so. But in the context of Prototype U, I think it's the same as Kristiaan, where I think we have mentioned ourselves as being facilitators at the very first session, because like Kristiaan mentioned, we're facilitating a process where people are going to help one another grow and help one another achieve personal development goals. And we're not coaching them one-on-one. We're really creating an environment where they're going to help each other grow. And I think that's a distinction between a one-on-one coaching rather than facilitating a group process. But in the context of Prototype U, I think I want to see myself a little bit more as building the organization with facilitators, being one of them. And I love being one of them occasionally. And I also love to train new facilitators and bring them into the pack to help the peer-to-peer learning process at different places in the world.
What's the difference for you between coaching and facilitating, Miriam?
I think it's similar. I wouldn't put my finger on the training, that coaches need more training or less training. But I wouldn't call myself a coach either for exactly that reason. I didn't get the coaching training and I didn't put in the hours. And I think for me, coaching is really attached to a personal development. So I'm helping you for personal growth without a very specific expectation on an outcome. There must not be a tangible result. Whereas facilitation is a facilitation of a process, making it easy and usually with a very specific result in mind. On the other hand, while I was listening to Wouter, I was just this distinction between working on a business and working in a business came to my mind. It's like facilitation is like working on the business. It's like holding the space, providing the environment, defining the process. And then coaching is working in the business, where it's about the development of each part in it and how to grow.
Yeah, I think a manager can also be a facilitator. Facilitates the group of people he or she is managing or leading to perform best.
Totally. I think what the facilitator and the coach have in common is both believe that the answer is in the individual and the group. So they're not consultants or advisors who come with the answer in their backpack.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting distinction. Also that also in our programs, we're not going to say this is wrong, this is right, and we're going to guide you through a process where you're going to find the answers about yourself through making your own decisions, but also through interaction with other people in the group. And we're going to guide it process, ask a few questions here and there, but we're not going to tell you this is the answer, this is what you need to do, because throughout the process of people discovering themselves through interaction with others, we build ownership and they need to figure things out themselves. And we're not, as consultants, say this is the best way. Everybody's on a different path, and to really be successful on that path, it needs to be your own path. And in our case with Prototype U, we facilitate the process of peer-to-peer learning, but then we also have coaches, which sometimes if people in the groups want to have these one-on-one deep dives with a certain specific coach to go a little bit deeper than in the peer-to-peer learning process in the program. So we work on different levels in that way.
And before we go deeper in what Prototype U is and what you do with this process and program, I would first be curious, where does the name come from? And why is it Prototype U and not Perfect U?
Can I answer that one, Kristiaan? This is the go for it phase. I see it's actually super general. When we last met, we talked to each other more often, of course, Miriam, but in the last episode, it was all about innovation. And that's my background. So I come from a background of innovation, making better products faster. Was an innovation manager at Siemens for remote control of harbor cranes, innovation consultant. But at some point, when Kristiaan and I were having talks at a square in The Hague, wanted to do something meaningful with the knowledge we have. Kristiaan coming from an HR people background, an education background, myself from an innovation background. We considered, what if you apply those principles from innovation, not to service and product design, but to developing yourself as a person, running small experiments, testing your assumption, working with multidisciplinary groups, and testing where you want to go in life and taking the small steps to get there with a lot of reflection and agile way of working to change course if needed. And prototypes in innovation are small experiments, not small experiments which need to perform, but small experiments to learn. And one of my favorite quotes is one from Nelson Mandela. And he says, I never lose. I either win or I learn. And this is exactly the kind of approach we want to have with Prototype U. Well, what if we see ourselves as prototypes as a never-ending work in progress, where we can have a lifelong of learning and getting to know ourselves better through interaction with others. So what if we see ourselves lovingly as prototypes, where every experiment we do is about learning a little bit more about ourselves and moving to the direction we want to go.
This sounds exhausting.
Exhausting.
That you never arrive, that you're never perfect, that you're never.
But what's perfect? When you're there, there's always something new. So if you aim for perfection, you're also never done. Because if you I think this is what you notice in the stories of people that win the lottery and can make their life perfect by buying the perfect house, the perfect car, the perfect holiday, the perfect face, whatever they want, but they often still unhappy.
Because we fall back to our default level of happiness.
Yeah, and I think because and this is also an important element, I think, in the name of prototyping, with what Wouter is explaining, that your environment and yourself, you change. So when you found perfection, a year later, there's a pandemic, or there is a war, or there is just small things. You move, there's a new place where you need to travel more or less to work, or your work changes, or your job changes. And your partner leaves you. There's so many things that can change in good things and bad things. So therefore, there's no perfection. There's perfection in the moment.
Yeah. And in the process. And I don't get me wrong, I totally agree with you. And I think that life is a continuous improvement and development process, because otherwise it's also boring. And what's perfection in the first place, as you mentioned. And from what you just explained, I'm now wondering, is it a skill that you teach, or is it a mindset? Because it recalls the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear you speaking and the idea of Prototype You is the concept of the growth mindset.
Yeah, it's both skill and mindset.
Yeah, I would say so one of the guiding principles is progress over perfection, which taps into the discussion we just had. So there's to celebrate progress rather than to aim for perfection, and to celebrate your small wins. And if you talk about mindset, it's about growth mindset. That's a big part of it. And through the process, you can train that. And there's also part of it is skill set, learning people how to learn, learning people how to reflect, how to coach one another. So there's a lot of skills to be able to become a better learner, but also definitely a certain mindset to be able to bring that to life effectively. The growth mindset, progress over perfection, being open to learning from others. So it's both.
Yeah, and it should be both, because the right mindset, but not the right skill set, you will not. It will not be as good as if you have both, or if you have the skill set but not the mindset. So if you understand the process but you don't have the right mindset, then it's not going to happen.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounds as if you do have the mindset but not the skill set, you get frustrated because you know that something has to change, but you don't know how. And if you have the skill set but not the mindset, it's also frustrating because you can do something, but you don't know for what reason.
Yeah, and that's where it gets complex, because we also train people to become a Prototype You facilitator and run our programs themselves. And a skill set, in my experience, is you can teach people a skill set, procedures, ways of working. You can train people there, but sometimes mindset, it's a more of a difficult beast to make people see things in a different light, and then people can consider themselves to be focused on progress over perfection, for example, or have a growth mindset. But in practice, that doesn't always mean the same things to people. So when we train people, you can see a difference between mindset and skill set. And I think mindset to us, so to really live those guiding principles of our approach, is the most important thing, and the skill set will follow when training people.
So what is then the process? So what are you prototyping, and who defines that? So if I if I enroll in Prototype U, is it then a lifelong process? Because I will always remain a prototype. So maybe it's a lifelong subscription. Or is it a program from which I can graduate and then I learned how to keep the machine run, how to remain the prototype for myself?
So are we here talking about the becoming Prototype U facilitator or being a participant in a program?
Being in the program. So your product is Prototype U, and what am I prototyping and what's the process?
Wouter's keeping his mouth shut, so I'll pick up the talking stick. What are you prototyping? Well, the name is Prototype U, so you are prototyping yourself. The process is to have the nutshell, and then maybe with questions that you have, we can go a bit deeper, is that in the process that's being facilitated by a facilitator, you go through certain steps based on the aim of the program. That can be based on your career development, skill development, or work experience. And now the work experience is mainly focused at companies with a hybrid working. In a session, people go through certain steps to discover things about themselves based on their ambition, based on their ideal way of working. And they do this with a buddy. They have talks with their buddy. There are talks in the group. So that helps them to have little reflections in the session. Session ends always with a prototyping plan, which we started calling a prototype plan, but that was a bit vague to people. I like to still call it prototyping plan because it resonates nice with the name, but it's an action plan as we call it now. So there's a plan of action which they create themselves. So the facilitator and the activities they go through in a session help them to select the right focus. So there's always one challenge that they pick up, not 6, it's just one. And then they build their actions for a short time. So it's 2 to 4 weeks that they will go through these actions and experiments. And then in the next session, there's reflection. And each session goes like this. So there are activities based on the theme, based on where they are in the program, ends with a plan of action. They will go through the actions and experiments themselves. So there is 2 to 4 weeks in between sessions. They have meetings with their buddies, they do their experiments, they get insights, or they don't. That's also possible. Because in the reflection, it's reflected upon what did you learn from the things that you did, and what did you learn from the things that you did not do.
So it's similar to a retrospective in a Scrum process, basically, where everyone, instead of working on software development, they work on their personal development.
Yeah, so it's nice that you mentioned this. So if we work with people that know this process, you maybe not in the first session, but when we do the reflection and then start over or build upon the reflection, then something clicks like, hey, we get the same reactions that you had, like, hey, this is like this. And then they already have part of the important skill set and mindset to start applying that on themselves.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, it even gets a little bit more similar, because also in a retrospective, it's about what did you learn about the product we're developing, but also what did we learn as a group about our collaboration. And in these retrospectives, it's also about you're working with a buddy team. How can we help? How did we help each other? And how can we help each other even better in the next learning cycle? Because we're calling it learning cycles. If you see our model, it's a 6-step iterative model, which starts from your compass. And your compass is all about your own values. What do you find important in life? And then you move towards your ambition, where it's all about where they want to go. And then to focus on the one most important thing that you want to pick up to work towards your ambition, because we're gonna do everything at once. There's a lot of essentialism in our approach. where not moving an inch in every direction, but making miles on the things that are important to you. Then get into that action plan, which Kristiaan referred to, where you say, this is my action plan, buddy, I'm going to do this. And dear buddy, lovely buddy, cool buddy, I'm going to help you too with your action plan. And you're creating that mutual commitment to help one another during that learning cycle. That can be a friendly reminder sometimes a kick in the ass, depends on what the person needs during the learning cycle, but to really get going. And what's important there is that we really want to work from a person's personal ambition and personal value, so as to really inspire people to get going with learning, but also at the end of a program to inspire people to keep learning, so that we train them in, okay, Kristiaan and I or another facilitator, we will leave, but we give you the tools and the building blocks to keep going peer-to-peer learning while we're not in your lives anymore, so to speak.
Thank you for walking me through it. So many things come up for me. One is I read somewhere that the biggest change processes are successful. The most successful change process focus on what is known and what stays the same instead of what's changing. So I can imagine by using a method that is kind of well known and established and using it in a different context gives some sort of structure and security to the participants that, oh, prototype you, okay, I don't need to do something totally new, that I have an anchor. I understand that. So now I can apply it. I can imagine that this kind of helps the individuals going through the program.
If they know the process you're referring to, because not everybody knows it, obviously. So then you see that the learning of the skill set takes longer.
And then but then it has also a potentially bigger impact because, okay, I'm making an assumption now. My assumption is that teams would go through that. So it's not a group of individuals who don't know each other, but it's a team where everyone works on their individual challenge, but also they work as a team. And then by learning this process, they can apply it to other things in their teams.
But that's the right assumption, Miriam. So don't worry, because what we don't worry, because what we notice a lot in a program. So we have a couple of different contexts where we apply our peer-to-peer learning process to. So it's actually our main thing we know is a peer-to-peer learning process, but you can apply it to different domains. And one of them, which is really relevant at the moment, is prototyping your work experience. And at this point, it's often a hybrid work experience, whichever that may mean in different contexts, but where a peer-to-peer learning process where you and your colleagues help each other experiment towards your ideal way of working individually, as a team, and for the organization. So taking those different interests in mind. And what we notice a lot in those programs, that when we run through them, that they have these aha moments where they say, okay, now I've applied this way of learning personal development through creating great work experience, but I can also apply this to my personal life or to different aspects of my life where I want to make some progress or make some changes. And this is actually really fulfilling to have these moments where it clicks for people and how they can even add value with the process outside the programs. That's really nice.
It reminds me of something a previous guest said about the design thinking method. As a design thinker, you do remember the moment where you met design thinking. So it's this life-changing kind of, oh wow, I can apply this to so many different areas. And from what you described, the prototype you approach has a similar potential where, oh, there is this method, I'm learning this now, I'm applying it to one part, but I can actually also apply it to different parts.
Yeah, definitely.
And what I'm curious about is especially with the example you just gave, that some team members that you're working with now are applying the method to designing their work experience. Did you say that?
Yeah,
Their work
experience.
So this sounds to me as if the assumption is that everyone has a degree of self-responsibility for their work experience. So if I'm not happy with my work experience, what can I do in order to improve it, instead of running to my manager and complaining? And I would be curious to hear more about that. And as a side question to that, what's the role of a team leader or manager in your process?
That's two totally different questions.
Oh, in my mind, they're so closely related.
Well,
I see the association.
Maybe you can pick up the second question, Wouter, or add on my answer to the first question and pick up the second.
Sure.
So yes, there is definitely a degree of responsibility, because that's what we are trying to build, and it's also the mindset change. I think that not the only, but an important one. You refer to running to your manager and complaining. I think many people don't even take that step. They just take it for granted. Like, I work here in this environment that maybe they don't even see that that has influence on them in a maybe in a negative way, or there are things to be changed that will help them. I think this is the pandemic, COVID pandemic, is, if you will take positive elements out of it, we changed the way that we work, and we have experienced different ways of working, which are not all better, but some things are better. But I noticed in talking to people, be clients, be friends, family, that people start to think about, where do I work? How do I work? What do I do? So that's changing. So maybe people are now running to their managers, but there's a lot to be done by people themselves, and to make them responsible. The focus Wouter was referring to, that's part of each session in our program. The focus starts with, how can I? And then there is this question, it's about the I. What can you change? What can you do? If you work somewhere where you don't like the office, you cannot change the office, probably. But there's other things you can change. And by running through experiments and learning, then they have specific information and input that they can go to their manager or leader and talk to, and say, I have done these experiments, this works, this doesn't work. I want to work more from home, just as a very simple example, because of these reasons. And I've tested it and I perform better, something like that.
So they come also with very constructive and explicit ideas instead of just a complaint.
Yeah, I remember somebody who I was studying with. He I think he still works at Schiphol, and
which is the airport in Amsterdam.
Yes. Everybody knows Schiphol, of course. And he is, I don't know his exact job, but it's connected to the luggage, so it's not particularly a role that you will perform from home. And this was he was not handling the luggage, but he was managing processes and those kind of things. And this was before the pandemic, and he wanted to work from home because he was having a side business, and he thought he could do his job, 5-day job, in 3 days, and even from abroad. So, and this is really prototype U mindset. He went to his manager, talked about it, and they agreed upon testing it for 4 weeks. And if it was not working, he had to shut up and just come to work every day. And if it was working, he could continue. And it was working.
Nice.
So he managed to get a 5-day job in 3 days, and being able to go to Greece and work from there for a few weeks. and he did not go through our program, but that's the mindset, having the information or testing it together with your manager. Manager needs then to understand the process and the mindset of, let's run an experiment and measure if it works or not.
And before Wouter guides us through the role of the manager, because I think that's fascinating, I just need to drop this brain fart. The next iteration of Prototype View could be for families. I mean, how cool would it be to have children actually taking responsibility of how they want to develop in family life? Okay, you don't want to clean up your room. So how can we design a process and prototype the rules of the family?
Prototype your family life. Yeah.
Prototype your family experience.
Well, Miriam, you can come and get the facilitator training, and
yeah, but what
you can
it is, so the prototype view for kids is something that's definitely sometimes on our minds, but more of the how do we approach learning for kids? So is it really focused on perfection being complete, or very early in your life promoting children or aspiring children to run experiments for themselves and to be brave in learning and to be brave in failing? And I don't like the word failing because it's actually just another word for learning. But the prototype view mindset of running experiments and learning, I think it would be really nice if that mindset would be in education as well from a very young age.
Let's change the school system.
Yes, let's change the school system. And just one parenthesis, because we always say, and personally, I also say it, oh, I don't like the word failure, and let's replace it by learning. And I wonder whether actually we're doing ourselves, whether we're helping ourselves. Wouldn't it be even better if we just say that, yeah, it's okay to fail and let's call it fail and we can learn from it? And I recently, I haven't read it yet, but Daniel Pink wrote a new book called Regret on how important it is to actually have regrets. And I'm the first person who always say, I don't do regrets and I don't need regrets and I look forward and there's only learning.
I do regrets, Miriam, definitely.
And he says how important it is to have regrets because it's through the process of regretting stuff that we're learning. And I think if we stop calling a failure, then maybe we're taking away the opportunity to learn. And it's okay to learn. Maybe we just have to take away the judgment.
I think that building resilience and being able to endure pain in life in some way is extremely important. And you cannot prevent painful experiences, regret, shame in some way, but hopefully we're able to turn that in something constructive. And it's very much a functional thing to feel regrets and to feel pain. And it would be such a shame if we're not able to turn it into something positive. And that's, I think, where it is. It's good to sit with it, good to feel it, and then trying to transform it into something more beautiful. So it's like the first seed, and then it can grow into something beautiful. It's sometimes, for me, the most painful things in life, when I reflect back, are the moments where I grew the most in hindsight. And that's perhaps something to keep in mind when you feel the pain. It's still painful at the moment, but in the end, it can be also the moments of growth in your life where you can also feel thankful for. I do feel we drifted a bit off of the question.
Yes. Still super interesting, I think. And let me help you to get back on track.
Can I drift off a little bit more? Just a little bit more, because I think the failing is an important element, and I agree on your conversation, both of you, on failing. We should be careful with the term failing because of all the judgments that's there, which is created from the moment you go to school. Well, first year, maybe there's a lot of playing, but then there are already these tests and exams, and either you fail and you have to redo it, or there's some consequence, or you pass. And there the mindset is built that failing is not good. It would be for me, a very nice experiment to go to a non-Western country where they have a non-Western school system and see if how they feel about failing. I have an assumption that there's no negative judgments there, which would mean if we would go there with our prototype U program, they probably go through the program in a different way.
And
but
maybe
this is just an assumption and on the failing. I just wanted to share my thoughts on that.
And maybe you don't have to go that far, because the Montessori system, for instance, I think is also based on that.
Sure, but these people still need to pass certain levels to go through high school or university. And
yeah. And I think, and that's maybe how we can bring it back to the question that I hope Wouter will answer about the manager. I think for learning, also we need an environment in which we feel safe, because in order to, whether we call it learning or failing, there's this moment where we have to admit that we don't know. If we knew, we don't have to learn, right? And admitting that we don't know is vulnerable. There is a risk involved in that. So it feels like now we made the question even bigger. So I was curious about the role of the manager initially, because of this autonomous process where everyone in the team can basically becomes the designer of their own best life in this team. So how important is it to have a manager who is part of the process or supervising it, or at least the sponsor or ambassador? And what is the role then also of the manager to create this kind of space for growth, learning, failure, however we want to call it?
Yeah, so I think I'm borrowing this term from you, Miriam, because we're all oftentimes talk about a safe space. And I think I've heard it for the first time with you, not talk about a safe space, but a brave space, a brave space where you can run experiments. So that's also one we're referring to a lot in our sessions. So thank you for that.
Yay!
Credits to Miriam. And yeah, so to first answer the question, it all starts with autonomy and a mandate for the participants to design their ideal work experience. And at some point there, they can change part of that desired work experience for themselves. And partly there can be organizational constraints or a current way of working which prevents them from it. And in the former, it's all about ownership of the participants to work on the things you can change yourselves. And it's about, for the second part, it's about addressing that you see this is a personal preferred way of working, but these are organizational constraints which prevent me from doing so. And to bring that up at, for example, your team manager or a person, the person who can have a say in that or change in that. And where the role of the manager comes in for us is, I'm not trying to make this too complex, but you have different types of programs, and one is prototype your career. And there the participants, there should be as little hierarchical structure in that program as possible for people to freely open up what their ambitions are and helping each other move there. So in those programs, prototype your career, we oftentimes exclude managers so that people in the group will have this brave space where they can experiment towards their ideal career, which may be inside the organization, but possibly also outside the organization. If it's about prototyping your work experience program, that's the peer-to-peer learning process for prototyping a work experience. It's more that you have the individual components where you can have your own preferred way of working, but you also have people you work with, where you have your team members, and the way people gain and drain their energy is different. So you need to talk about each other. So our process is really about first becoming self-aware, then through interaction, get to know each other better. And from there on, help each other get to that ideal work experience. And there's a clear role of a manager in that team, around the team, to support that process And it's a kind of a make or break role, because either as a manager, people have run through the program, they have their ideal working days, and the manager say, oh, that's nice, we're not going to do that because we have organizational constraints. Or that person, it's more the command and control manager. But if you have an empowerment manager, it's okay, you've a servant leader is also a term often used. I'm going to help you towards your ideal work experience because I trust you know how to do your work as a team, and I'm going to help you do that. What do you need from me? And that way, it's either a very fertile ground, or so the manager is the one who at the end, how much of the program is implemented and has a clear role in that. But this is something we also definitely check at the start of our programs, and for creating that ideal work experience, managers are incredibly important.
Well, actually, I think in the career programs as well, the manager or leader, depending on what, how you look at the different terms, leader and manager, but that's also a facilitator.
Yes.
At least if it's not, if the company does not have the culture that somebody who's leading is facilitating their work, their learning, their whatever they need to do their job very well, then it's not the company that we can work with. We have sometimes, Wouter was referring to, in the ambition, people can design, or we make people design their career outside the current company just to think about it. Not that we push them out of the company, absolutely not, but just we let them build multiple options of their next few years, and one of them can be outside of the organization. Just what would you do? How would it look like? And there will be elements that they can take into their current job. But there are organizations, when we talk about this, that say we're not going to do that because they cannot leave the company. And that's the moment that we either have a very interesting discussion with the potential client, or we do not work with them. Because,
red flag.
Yeah, because that tells a lot about the culture, the mindset of leadership in the organization. Wouter was talking about servant leadership. That should be at least part of the mindset that we are teaching people in the program, should be with the managers. And sometimes we therefore do a program separately for the management team or the team of leaders, so they understand the process that the rest of the people go through.
This makes total sense, and it reminds me of a conversation I had with Viren Taka, also on the podcast, who said that for it is a role of a team leader, if it's a coaching manager, coaching leader, to also realize that, yes, if the company cannot provide further growth opportunities for their staff members, it's also their role to help these people grow outside, because these will also become the ambassadors of the company. They go outside and speak of the company in the best words, and thereby also is a marketing tool, if you may call it that way.
That's right. And the other side is that if you keep them, they become a frustrated employee.
Yes. Yeah, then it becomes a risk. And talking about risks, yes, the team leader manager plays a role. So I'm wondering whether you also then coach or support the leader, because I think this can be a lot of responsibility for a person to set boundaries, set expectations, to be there to also accompany their team members during and after the process. And how would you deal with a situation where after the process, even the manager realized, oh, I promised too much. I'm only part of the organization, and actually we were hoping that we can do this, but in fact we cannot.
To be honest, with the last question, we haven't had too much experience with that, so it hasn't happened, to be honest. So I think it's a good thing, because that would be it would be a shame, a pity.
But yeah, and I think that's because we probably a company where the risk is that this happens does not want to hire us to work with us.
They don't pass the red flag test.
No.
Yeah, so exactly. So the red flag pass test for us, is it an organizational command and control structure? So is it organization-led organization, or is it an employee-led organization? And if it's an organization who wants to give autonomy towards the people inside the organization to build the organization and give lots amount of freedom, then it's a prototype organization. And to get to the first part of your question, what we love to do first is to run the program with a couple of the managers, so that they know what their people get to experience. And for those people who are going to run the programs themselves, it's they see that their management walks the talk, practice what they preach, and they also are part of that process. So you remove the hierarchical component, and shows that, okay, this is just the way we're going about in this organization, and the learning takes place in all levels of the organization, regardless in what level you are acting. What's also a component, so we work from autonomy, and this even starts before people enter a program, because when we have made a deal, it has passed the red flag test, there's a green flag, and we're going to run a couple of programs. Then we always ask or require for people to actively, voluntarily, and explicitly say, I'm going to take part in this program. Because it makes all the difference when they first show up in the first session and you ask the question, hey, why are you here? And they will not say, yeah, it's because my manager, or it's because of the organization, I have to. No, they already have a reason, or they start thinking about the reason, because it's not really explicit to them yet. And that's the first part of building ownership in the program, that there's ownership on an organizational level to do the programs, and ownership on an individual level to really take part in the programs, because you want to get something out of it. And that's how we build the ownership on different levels.
I love that. And I want to come back to the red flag test.
Yes, please.
Because I think that's something that many facilitators experience, that we go into a company, or we are hired for a process or a workshop, and then too late realize, ooh, this is not going to work because we are not aligned. So do you have a certain kind of checklist that you would apply to see, okay, is this a company we actually want to work with? And maybe you can share your experience, maybe also some lessons you learned, because I think many of us can learn from that.
I think that the biggest, I'll leave the checklist for you, Wouter. If you want to.
I go to look it up. Where's the checklist?
No. There's one thing that comes to mind. What have we learned is, I think you can be, as a company, as a facilitator, be very eager to work somewhere, and then pass this moment that you check who's the audience and what's the environment of the audience, just because you want to have the job, you're excited, or you
shiny object,
want to take the money. But if they do not pass your stress test or red flag test, and you're in there, you get a very frustrating workshop program, and probably not even a happy customer. So it's bad in many senses, maybe only good for your short-term profits. And I think it's not that that this is something that happens a lot, but we have had this, not like being in a workshop like this is not working, but more conversations with companies we feel like we're going to work together. But there, when looking back at it, there were so many red flags, and then you had maybe 8 or 10 talks, and then at some point you basically already knew it was going to happen. There's no working together because of all these red flags that are on both sides. So that eagerness to get the job is, I mean, it's a good thing, but it's, to not forget to check.
It's a false, it can be a false friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have definitely have our fair share of sunk cost in some of those processes where we kept trying, regardless of the red flags we saw in hindsight. And but that's where the learnings are, and to get the, I think for us it's actually a couple of steps where we say, could this be a great collaboration or not? And it starts with our own organizational compass, that it aligns with the aligns enough with the organizational compass of the organization, or where the organization wants to transform towards to. So we're really about empowerment and employees having a great autonomy in the organization to shape the organization. It doesn't mean that an organization already fully needs to be there, but it needs to be a genuine desire to get there. And that's where we can help out. But that desire needs to be genuine. One of the other things is really about the focus on people. So no human resources in the term of resources, but really people, focus on people, their needs, because the organization believes that will benefit both people and the organization. And if we feel that there's a more traditional approach to business, which is perfectly fine for that organization, because we also believe that our service offering is not a one-size-fits-all. There is no one-size-fits-all, but so people-led, focus on people, but also that we're asking the questions, what are you doing already, to really get a feel on the initiatives already taking place, because sometimes people can say they're people-focused and people-led, and it can be a marketing slogan. And then we really need to figure out how important is it really, and do we really solve an important problem over there? Because if there's not if they don't feel the problem is important enough, they will not go about for our solution. And I think that can be a challenge of our business, is that we not focus on the core product of a organization, but we focus on.
We do.
Well, it's not the product that's towards clients. So we focus not on the core product of the organization, but we focus on the people who are creating and delivering the core product. So making those people better, and so that means that it's always deemed important by the organization, but not always urgent. And then we need to find organizations where it's found both important and urgent enough to get the programs going.
Which sounds a little bit like a catch-22, because if an organization is at the point where they consider their people's issues as urgent, it's usually when things are falling apart, right? Unfortunately.
Yeah, there can be a
or it is a very self-aware scale up. So a company that is entering the scale up phase, or a merger. I think these are the big changes where you're aware that, okay, we have to focus on people and it's urgent. Otherwise, urgency usually comes from a pain. And if it's related to people, that's dangerous, right?
Yeah, unless leadership has a nice vision and looks forward, and then makes it urgent before it becomes a painful problem.
True, and then so any external shock actually can create urgency. So a pandemic and working from home.
Yes.
Yeah,
so we mostly really love to work with organizations who take on a preventive approach rather than a reactive approach when it comes to people, and really to invest in people rather than to react to the pains. But of course, things can unexpectedly happen. and then you need to work on that as well. So it's a mix of it's mostly organizations who look forward and they have a preventive approach, an investing approach when it comes to people. And then life happens. So there are always things that happen when skill mergers, COVID, which makes that you need to take on a different approach.
Yeah, and to come back to your question, Miriam, maybe for the audience listening, hello audience, practical tips for the red flag test. Maybe we should create a red flag test, Wouter, like on paper and questions. I think very practical and simple thing to do is ask your potential customer, why do you want this program, workshop, whatever, as a facilitator you're going to perform there? Why do you want to have it? What do you hope to get out of it? What do you hope that the results are? Because that information already gives so much of insight in whether they understand what they are getting from you or not. And if not, then you have a conversation about it, and then there might be a red flag arising.
And maybe even asking why they want it now.
Yeah.
So why is now the best moment in time and not later?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to your red flag test. Somehow I assumed there was one
soon, Miriam. We actually have a couple of different stages with different questions, so it's nice to share. So yeah, let's take on that commit. We'll share it. We'll share it soon.
And I'm curious because you mentioned in the very beginning your facilitators, that you're training facilitators in your Prototype U program, and I would be curious of your experience. How is it to first develop this method? And then it seems to me that, okay, you first build the method, you test it, you try it, you see it works.
Prototype it.
You prototype it. But then at some point you have a final version because you need to put it into a process to train other trainers on it. So then the prototyping phase of at least your product must be done, because otherwise you need a constant kind of update of your facility.
Yeah, but that's, I think, so the main ideation process has been completed. But what the nice thing is that you always have this, we apply our Prototype U learning cycle to our Prototype U products to keep experimenting with it. And even when you have a product, it's never done, can always be improved. So you're getting to this continuous improvement process. And what has been very fulfilling is that Kristiaan and I have created this process, but now we have all these different facilitators from different walks of life who are going to facilitate these programs and say, this is working well in my context, this could be improved, and you get all these fresh ideas about how this process can be improved. And that's a very humbling and very cool experience to be able to improve the programs by having a group of facilitators who bring it into the world. And that's just very, very fulfilling.
And as a person who facilitates facilitators herself, and I always refer to herding cats when I do that, and I'm a cat myself, I realized. How do you take into consideration, and is it then a co-designed process where you really include your facilitators, or is it more like, okay, drop your feedback in the box here, and we put it in the backlog?
I think a little bit of both. We have community sessions each month where people can bring in questions, challenges, case studies of whatever's happening. So that could be a nice moment for co-creation, also with other facilitators in the community, but also with us. We're now running a program where one of us is facilitating with one of the facilitators. So there is co-creation happening, and we can learn from each other. And it's also just providing the feedback, like this doesn't work for me, or I would need more information on this. And to come back to your question in when is it done, we're now entering also a program where we have a hybrid workshop where part of the people is not in the room and part of the people in the room. We're going to learn from that when we do that, and we'll apply it and share it with the facilitators, the learnings, and maybe we need to even change parts of the program because of it. So then there's an update, and we have, I mean, the updates will be uploaded to a place where the facilitators can take in and use it.
And what would be I assume that from what you explain, how rigorous you are in the selection of your clients, you might have a similar selection process for your facilitators. Or how do you know that, or how do you recruit your facilitators?
It's 5 interviews, 2 case studies, IQ test, EQ test.
A month on a lonely island.
A month in isolation. Yeah. No, I think well, I'm not going to top that, Kristiaan. It's actually
we're still in that process actually ourselves.
And then they wonder why they only have psychopaths.
Yeah, exactly. So there is not a explicit that we're standing at the door. Okay, you're allowed to get in, and you're not allowed to get in. It's not like that. But what we're doing is the way we position our training, our facilitator training, is that we really put a spotlight on the guiding principles of our approach. So our values, our approach, and what it means. So that you already know that if people are aligned to that way of working, that way of thinking, that it might be a good match. And then there's there's again that mindset, and then there's still the skill set, but that you can develop in the training itself. So it's a more implicit way of at the door say, hey, when you enter this door, we work according to these guiding principles and according to these values. That makes it some people want to get into the club, and some people, no, that's not the club for me. And yeah, to be really clear about it, because people are all different, we have different value systems, and that's perfectly okay. That makes life interesting. But if you have a really different value system than Prototype U, chances are that Prototype U is not for you as a facilitator, at least.
It's also a self-responsibility there. So not only in the programs, it's also in becoming a facilitator. We help people to see the match or see that there's no match. A requirement to get into the training is that you have experienced the program and the process yourself, either because you've been in a program at the company or somewhere else, or we have a free experience session where, as a potential facilitator, you go through the process as a participant, so you understand it from that point of view. So that also helps people to understand what the product is as the facilitator licensed product, and helps them to decide this is for me or not for me.
Yeah, it's actually quite similar to the organizations where is there enough overlap in each other's compass so that we'll have a fruitful collaboration. And if we notice that perhaps a wannabe facilitator doesn't really want to live the values, then we have a conversation about it. Okay, what do these values mean to you, and what do they mean to me? And is there enough alignment that we are able to deliver value to that person? Because if it doesn't align, we're not in a position to really add value. And what we really also want to keep the quality of how we want to bring Prototype U in the world. We want to keep it to certain standards. That peer-to-peer learning process is really dear to us. We have done a lot of work and spent a lot of time, work, and energy to create that process, and now to improve it. And it's really great to maintain that level of quality and create impact in the world. But it means that the people who are running those processes need to align to it.
And I can only imagine that as a founding fathers, it can be scary to know that there are these individuals who have their own interpretation of
Super
the process,
scary.
and they do it their way, which
Yeah.
is, of course, which is a nice thing, but it's also scary because I think especially when we created something, we get attached. So how do you, for you as then recruiters of facilitators, what makes a good facilitator? And what makes a good prototype view facilitator? Is it different?
The one, yeah, not the one thing, a thing, let's put it that way, is we get a lot of coaches in our facilitator pool. So coaches, one-on-one coaches are going to be trained as facilitators. And the great facilitators, they really focus on the group process so that they really inspire participants in the group to start helping one another. And it can be at sometimes that you, from a coach perspective, okay, I can help this person now, but by helping that person in the moment, sometimes you take the opportunity away for buddies to help each other in the process. So sometimes it's really about taking it a step back and facilitating the group process so that the peer-to-peer connections start to exist, and they're going to help one another out. Yeah, and the prototype view process, it's about peer-to-peer learning. It's about really personal stuff you're going to talk about. So making the connection first so that people start to build trust towards one another and starts to share. That capability is incredibly important. Something to add, Kristiaan? What does the prototype view facilitator need to do really well?
Well, I think in general, a facilitator needs to make the facilitation about the participants and the methodology or the process, and not about the facilitator itself. So trying to make, and that sounds a bit weird. I don't mean that coaches make coaching about them, although some do. But then you are in that process of helping that person and performing coaching the way you do it, facilitating the process, and then being able to let things go and happen and not step in when you see people going into the wrong direction. For example, we let people choose that focus, that how can I do whatever they want to do. As a facilitator, you may notice that they choose the wrong focus. You see that they are choosing something simple, something not very important, and they also have these other things written down on Post-its that are more important. You notice quite early in knowing the people that they are trying to avoid working on the real thing. You can take more coaching perspective and then trying to help them with questions and those kind of things to get to that one and steer them, maybe even push them to that point. In the prototype view process, we actually, of course, there's some questions you can ask the individual and help them a bit. But because they go into a learning cycle of maybe 2 weeks, and then they will reflect. And in their reflection, the way the reflection is built on, they reflect on, was this the right focus? Mm. And if they did not choose the right focus, they probably didn't do their actions because it was not that important. And then there's so much learning. If, as a facilitator, you help them really hard to get into the other point of focus that you already notice as a facilitator, you take away the learning, and they might choose the focus because you tell them and not because they want it themselves. So facilitating that process and being able to step back and let people swim and maybe almost drown. Of course, you should not let them drown and then take them up, but almost let them drown because you know there will be help coming and they will find the help themselves. So make it about them and their learning. And learning is also, we talked about failing, that failing is not a bad thing. So don't take away those moments that they can learn and feel, and let the body do that as well.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, it's in our facilitation process, it's about to inspire, to activate people to start learning, but also to keep learning. And that also means that in the process, people need to make their own decisions, the participants. And if you start intervening in that and say, hey, I think you need to go that way, you start to decrease the ownership of people in that process. So it's around really nurturing ownership, facilitating that in the process, so that the chances increase that people will actually follow up on their action plan and help their buddy, because it's really their plan coming from their intrinsic motivation rather than coming from a facilitator or somebody else. So really people making their own decisions, small steps to get there, chances will increase, they will actually do it.
And also, while you were explaining, I realized how arrogant it almost is if we are stepping in as facilitators or coaches, seeing what is important and what is not, and seeing and understanding that someone is running in the wrong direction, and knowing that there are other actions that have a higher priority. Who are we?
How dare you?
Right? Who
Yeah.
are we to assume that we are seeing things that the others don't see, and to point that out? I think
that's also a big reason not to do that. And even though if you're right, then still,
yes, and
maybe you're wrong.
Maybe you're wrong, and the thing is, you will never know, because usually there's only one action you can take or not take. So you don't know what would have happened if you did something else. But at the end of the day, you want the person to take the decision who is also responsible and accountable for their actions, right?
Yeah, and sometimes there's also something, a different side to it. And that's that sometimes there might be a more important challenge or more urgent, but people don't have the confidence yet to take that one on. And they first start with something that's a little bit less scary, perhaps a little bit less important, but something that where they can get going and build confidence. And that's also worth very much for people to take something on, to work toward it, and they can be really happy about it, rather than that really big challenge which feels like a mountain and they cannot get going. So for people to pick, sometimes there's a real good reason why people pick up a different challenge, and it's really personal. So you're completely right, Miriam. Who are we to say what people should do and not do? Everybody's on a different path there.
Yeah, and I think there's one other important element as a facilitator in general, probably as well, but especially prototype view facilitator, which we haven't talked about about our methodology, is that the activities that are taking place, they have a very specific time box. There's a specific amount of minutes that the participants use to work on their exercise or to talk with their buddy.
Yes, there's some noise. Maybe you use it. Yes. Is there some paper around you somewhere?
Oh,
that's good.
I don't think. Is it better now?
Yeah.
So there is, for example, 10 minutes to talk with your buddy, or there's 10 minutes to work on this exercise. As a prototype view facilitator, you should be able to use that time to stop them working on the exercise and go to the next step. Otherwise, you won't reach the end of the workshop in time. And this is something sometimes really difficult, because you have to stop conversations between buddies. In Zoom online, it's very easy. You just click on close breakout session and they're back. But it's also that you need to stop them working on their ambition, because they get 25 minutes and then it's done, just to get them into that essentialism flow and not make it perfect. However, if you're always super strict you will frustrate participants. So there should be also an amount of flexibility. If you notice, if you listen and notice the body conversation is that important, extend the time box a bit. And playing with that and therefore facilitating the learning is a very important skill in our process. Because if you listen too much to the participants, you cannot finish the program, which is not good for the participants and not good for yourself. But if you're too strict, then you're also frustrating people. So the amount of flexibility in playing with that is very important.
Yeah, and I think when doing our assignments, when the people run through the process, it always feels to them that the time box is too small. And I mean, give somebody half an hour and it will take half an hour. Give somebody 3 hours, it will take 3 hours. So give somebody an extra house, you fill up the house. So we're very good as human beings to fill up stuff we get. And so as a prototype view facilitator, you really need to emphasize, remind people that it's a first prototype, a first version of that assignment. So, and that you can mature that the result of that assignment outside the session itself and can revisit it in next sessions. So when you say it doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be a first draft, a first version, work from your intuition, then it already makes that people, when the time is over and they still feel that they didn't have enough time, that it's okay, because they can revisit it at some later point and use new insights to mature their the things they worked out.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. I think there's even a term for this. I think it's Parkinson's law, that any task will take as long as you allocate, as much time as you allocate to that task.
Exactly. That's the one.
This was Mr. Parkinson who found that out about bureaucracies. And I think it's fascinating what you describe, because it points at all the different layers of the skill set of a facilitator. That yes, first of all, you need to do the inner work in order to stop judging the work of the group and to be in service for them, without your ego and your own perception and getting attached to certain outcomes. And you have to be so much in service of them, for them, to keep them on track, because there's never enough time, and still have enough empathy or feeling or whatever it is to say, okay, in this particular moment, it makes sense to give you more time. And we're taking away this time from a later stage. So they really have to be highly skilled in terms of maturity as a facilitator, but also in the understanding of your program.
Definitely. It's about understanding people. It's about understanding the process. It's about bringing that into practice, not only the theory, but also being able to do that consistently. But we also work with two facilitators, for example, with a lot of our programs. That one can be the eyes and ears of the group while the other one is talking. And also there is sometimes a difference between the personal interest and the group interest. So sometimes, because it's really personal stuff, sometimes people, they want more time or they act emotionally. And then there needs to be time to discuss that. But so one facilitator stays in the room and keeps facilitating the group, while the other one goes to have a talk one-on-one with the person who's so emotional. So sometimes there also needs to be flexibility there, while also always keeping in mind it's in the end the group who needs to get the value out of it.
Yeah. One final question, because we are talking about the group and the personal journey. What happens if, and that it's time boxed? Of course, it's time boxed. If Wouter is involved, it's always time boxed, right? That's what I learned from you.
Constraints make creative, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And how do you deal with the situation that the individuals in the group might then be in a different pace? Because some And we have these individuals, some are never done and they are always kind of rethinking, overthinking, improving, and others are just, it's good enough. How do you balance this out in a process that is very personal, but at the end of the day, it's still a team that goes through this program?
I think we have designed the time blocks for each exercise in a way that it's, on average, it's okay. And indeed, it's always the same people being done way before the end of the time box, and there's always people struggling to get there. For those who are done earlier, they just get a little extra break. Or as a facilitator, you can go there and maybe give them some extra work or whatever, depending on how much time there's left. Those who always feel like I'm not done, they need to note that mentally or physically on paper, because at the end of the session, there's an action plan, and they can write down as an action, I will revisit the exercise and take as much time as I want to work, because it feels important and because they have loads of questions or uncertainties, or they don't know how to do it. So there's always a moment that they can decide, I'm going to revisit this because.
And I was, this makes a lot of sense. And I was actually thinking of the time between the sessions, because to guide a group that everyone finishes on time when the session ends, it's one thing, but to ask them to actually do the work in between, because there's a learning cycle, right? And you only progress if you do the work.
Yeah, and so there we have the 2 to 4 weeks where lesser than 2 weeks, it becomes too stressful to work on those plans. And after 4 weeks, it's no longer top of mind. You will revisit it a month later and you will get there. Yeah, also, by the way, when people do nothing and they, after 4 weeks, they enter the reflection, you can still think about, why did I do nothing? And you still get to learn from it. Didn't I do anything because I didn't want to, I didn't dare to, I was afraid, or because it wasn't possible? And from those learnings, from those questions, you can learn and perhaps get to a learning cycle where you're going to explicitly do stuff. Returning to the time box, it's also that sometimes people in organizations are not used to working in time boxes. So, and they underestimate themselves sometimes on what it can bring them. So when we start a program, we have this implicit learning or implicit exercises where they start to experience the time box, where they don't even know that they're experiencing time box, but they get into the flow of those small blocks. Whereas when they enter a certain time box, it's they start to experience what it can bring to them, and by the end of the third session, they don't want anything else anymore. They really love the time box, and of course there are exceptions. Of course there are exceptions, but overall, people really appreciate the time box and are surprised by the amount of work they can get done working from their intuition rather than overthinking stuff.
Do you have an example for an exercise that you would run? Maybe your favorite exercise before we close.
You have a clear favorite one, right, Kristiaan? The one calling up people?
Yeah, it's...
Or has it evolved by now?
Well, that's being named as a favorite exercise by participants is not particularly my favorite. Okay. I find it difficult to come up with an exercise because it is a program where exercises are building upon each other. So the output of one exercise is input of another exercise. Maybe something very relevant in the change of how we work is designing your ideal workday. And obviously there are many ways to do this, and there are many examples to be found online on how to do it. I like this exercise myself, but also to facilitate people, because the reactions that you get back is to and it's hard now in this conversation to explain the exercise because we have some guiding questions that help people to design their ideal workday, but it goes more or less like this. You get like 10 to 15 minutes to write down your ideal workday, and it's called ideal workday, not perfect workday. So what's in there? When do you wake up? Where do you wake up? How do you wake up? And then it continues to, you go to work, you're done with work, and until the moment you go to sleep again. Very detailed. What kind of clothing are you wearing? What do you eat? With who do you work with? How does a break look like? Those kind of very details that you can live it when you read it. That's the first part. The second part is to make it fit in 24 hours. And that's where sometimes you need to make choices because you notice that it doesn't fit in 24 hours, or you notice that you only have 3 hours of sleep left, which can be an ideal workday for some people. And the workday is the 24 hours. So there's a part of work and there's a part not working. So when you're done with that, the experiment is very clear. It's live it for one day, live part of it for a part of the day, and then learn from it, because it's always full of assumptions that you think you would like to do something in a particular way. And then reflect upon it and then change it, improve it, because it's the first prototype. And then you could change it whenever you need to change it. When you feel like it's done for now, then at some point you notice that it's not done, and you need to prototype again.
Yeah, and what's really nice about that process is that you're testing your own assumptions, and sometimes it feels as if we cannot fool anybody as good as we can fool ourselves, that we really think we will like something or we will love something, to do it in practice and figure out, oh, this is not really what I thought it would be. And for me, that is throughout my life has been running experiments where, and when I was 8 years old, people asked me, what do you want to be? I want to be a writer. And then only when I was 24 years old, and there still wasn't any book, and I started to experiment with writing and my ideal work days, and I figured out, oh darn it, I don't like writing. I like the idea of being a writer. And sometimes I like to write occasionally, but not a full-time writer. So I really like the idea of it, the concept of it, but not actually doing the work, doing the writing itself. And I think that's pro debut, getting to know yourself also through interaction with others, because sometimes the things that goes really natural for us and our talents, we don't see them, and we don't see them ourselves because they come so natural to us. So one fan favorite or participant favorite, so to speak, is an exercise where you give somebody a call and you ask the question, describe me in one word. And of course, in the sentence before you ask, you say, hey, I'm participant in the program, self-development program with peer-to-peer learning. And one of the exercises is to ask, describe me in one word. And oftentimes this is a quality of a certain person that you didn't, or that you wouldn't have thought about yourself. And this gives really nice input to have those follow-up conversations, to get to know yourself through interaction with others, and also oftentimes very positive affirmation about qualities that come really natural to you and you can be really appreciative of.
I forgot to add one important element in my description of the exercise, ideal workday. It's when you have designed it, share it with co-workers, with your partner, with anyone who's involved in that day, so they understand, they know, and they can, well, at least they know. That's the least things, and maybe they can help you, support you, and take that into account.
Very interesting. What would be your one word description for each other?
Time box. This is interesting.
I have my one word ready. Or can it be two?
For your
It's your exercise.
My exercise, yes, that's right. Hands-on. That's the one that comes to mind. Hands-on.
One word, not two words.
I think it would be nice in the podcast. I really figure out, is this something, the time that we're going to cut, or just leave it be there?
It's funny that you're saying that, because I was wondering.
Yeah, what would give the dramatic effect? A dramatic pause.
The dramatic pause, the drum roll, and
do I have something that? I only have this one.
Build the suspense.
But this is this is interesting. I think you should leave the time in it, because now I experience the need for finding the exact right words and overthink it. I mean, the time box was kind of a joke, but it describes a part of who Wouter is. So that would be a good answer. I think progress is also another word, and then I already mentioned two words. One is a bit of a joke, and then progress is would be the answer. But this is, I think, the reason why this exercise is interesting, because as the one who's asked the question, you want to give the right answer to make also the other person feel fulfilled, feel nice, feel good. And obviously, after mentioning the word, there comes the interesting conversation. Because now I feel like I want to ask Wouter, why do you call me hands-on? Why is that the word that comes to mind? Not as a hands-on. Oh, did you say handsome? I think we can run off the conversation. Now you've made my day.
If I've made your day, then I won't take it back.
I mean, it's not about the word. It's about then the interesting conversation follows. Because these kind of things, we didn't even do this. Like, can you imagine just co-workers, one family who don't even know the exercise? You never do something like this. And we even didn't do it.
I did the exercise, but we haven't asked each other.
That's I mean that right. with each other. Yeah.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, and
see you in another 100 episodes or something, or
yes. And in the meantime, with the Never Done Before community, for us to experience your prototype you process. I'm looking forward.
Definitely looking forward to that too.
So to close it off, what's the nutshell of our conversation? What are you taking away from it and giving it as a gift to the audience?
My nutshell is that facilitating is hard work, and should be hard work because you are helping a group of people going somewhere, and you should be very thoughtful about how to do that.
The thing I would prefer to do is just say amen. Amen to that.
The mic dropping moment.
The mic dropping moments. No, so for me, it's also, I still just want to say amen to that. But It's really interesting, these types of conversations with a facilitator or facilitators, Miriam, like you mentioned yourself, to always get these nuggets of facilitation, and how it's the same in lots of areas of facilitation, that you can facilitate in so many domains where you help people to bring their right expertise at the right moment in such a process and make the group get better. But also what I found interesting is conversation to really prototype use specific parts of facilitation in a process, which now I get to think of it might not even be so specific, but it feels that specific to me. So yeah, what I get out of the conversation is just a really nice conversation about facilitation and the red flag list. Why did I the red flag test? That's the one thing. So that's the one thing I'm going to share about after this conversation. It really got me thinking again. So we'll share that soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And if someone in the audience wants to reach out, learn more, become one of your facilitators or hire you, I will put everything in the show notes.
Yes.
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 Thank you.
Show notes.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.